Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along to the Housing Day, what we're calling it, Hub.
Live at Hacked.
Live at Hacked, exactly. So just to introduce you, we've got Stacey from South Yorkshire Housing, we've got Bogle from Hightown, and we've got Terrie Alafat, obviously, from the Chartered Institute of Housing. Thank you so much for coming along. Now, I believe that you've been somewhere this morning. Do you want to sort of tell us about that?
Yes, we have. We've had a nice coffee, haven't
Yes.
we? We actually met this morning at what I think is my alternate office, which is the coffee shop at the British Library.
Excellent.
And we've been having a very good discussion about Homes for Kathy and things that we could be doing with place shapers.
Absolutely. So Homes for Kathy has been going for a little while now. Do you want to sort of bring us up to date with the campaign and how it's going, really?
Yeah, I'll look to David to do that.
Okay.
Well, we've been going for about 2.5 years. We started when I phoned up Tony and a few other chief executives, and we realised that the anniversary of Kathy Come Home was coming up, 50 years after it was first shown on BBC TV. And of course a lot of housing associations were founded then, including both our associations and a number of others. So we thought it ought to be recognised, and sort of ended up with about 20 housing associations coming together to make something of that. I think really to emphasise that perhaps housing associations needed to reconnect with their roots, which were in homelessness. There's still a big homelessness problem, despite hundreds of thousands of social housing units being built, homes being built, and really housing associations need to demonstrate that they were still engaged in trying to solve this terrible problem of rough sleeping and families in temporary accommodation.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've asked for those involved to come up or to keep with some clear commitments.
Yes.
Which what we've seen on Housing Day, you sort of set out against that.
Yeah.
So, do you want to talk through the commitments and you know what you're expecting from those associations?
Sure. So this is work that the Homes for Kathy group did for Crisis. This was part of Crisis's plan to end homelessness once and for all. So Crisis had a 50th anniversary as well. And they decided they weren't going to have a party, they weren't going to celebrate because homelessness was still there. Don't know whether you remember, a quote from the founding managing director of Shelter said, "I had no idea when we set up Shelter that we'd still be there in 50 years' time." So John Sparks, the chief executive of Crisis, said, "We're not going to have a party, we're going to come up with a plan to end homelessness in this country once and for all." It's an interesting word there, end. I'm just in the middle of setting up a homelessness summit at the moment. We've used that language in there, and I've had the combined authority come back to me and say, "Oh no, we want to say tackle, we don't want to say end homelessness." Crisis wanted to say they wanted to end homelessness. That's their ambition. So in their plan, which was launched in April, it's 500 pages, but it's easy to dip in and out of. In their plan is an appendix which was put together by the Homes for Kathy group and the Crisis group to think about what housing associations can do to end homelessness. And that might sound simple, it might sound like a given, but it isn't. And if you speak to the local authorities and say housing associations homelessness, for some local authorities, we're part of the problem, not part of the solution. So we have to look at ourselves, we have to hold the mirror up and see what we're actually doing, for example, in terms of evicting people. For example, in terms of looking at who we're housing in the first place. So there's all kinds of things we can do. 9 commitments in there. Associations can use them like a slide rule, run them over their services and decide where they're falling short and come up with an action.
And you're looking for more associations to get involved?
Yes, I mean it's amazing really, because our boards are very engaged with this whole process of kind of an audit process, going through the 9 commitments, see how you perform against them. Boards are very keen on it, our staff are very keen on it. You know, it really highlights housing associations' social purpose and social impact. And the more associations, I think, who test themselves against those 9 commitments, the better. And I think that will really make an impact on homelessness, I think, because we can all do more. And of course, I think what Crisis highlighted to us when we first started talking to them was that actually housing associations are putting barriers in the way of homelessness, of solving homelessness. And
do you feel they've stepped back in recent times in the fight against homelessness? Do you feel
housing?
Yeah.
Well, I think you know there's lots of history here, isn't there? In last 10 years, austerity and everything else, and And, you know, there's a reason why we moved away from building social rented homes, and because we were trying to cross-subsidise the building of social rented homes for more commercial activities because grants were cut. So I think there's a perception that we've moved away from our central purpose, yes, and we've got to break that down, I think.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a perception and a reality issue here.
Yes.
So there's no doubt that a lot of people, for example, on the left of the Labour Party, the Unite Women's Union has just written a letter to every single local authority chief executive in the country complaining about housing associations, saying they've lost track of their social purpose, this kind of thing. So we're getting it from the left, we're also getting it from Boris Johnson and the far right as well, and some local authorities being critical. And part of that is just that we are doing housing for sale, we are becoming more commercial, and none of that is wrong in itself, provided we're using the profits from that to cross-subsidise social housing activities. So I think that's a kind of a perception issue, but there is a reality point as well, which is that if all we're being measured by, and I'll take issue now with the sector scorecard, if all we're being measured by is how cheap our housing management services are and how many new homes we're building, and not, for example, the numbers of people we're evicting, then it is very easy to see how we could take our eyes off the ball. And I do think there's a reality that is a real problem.
Yeah. And do you agree?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, the work we did last year on rethinking social housing, which hasn't finished, the beginning of that project was I have to say, was something I started thinking a lot about. I started talking about the value in the social and social housing, and had we moved a bit away from that? And I thought we had really. And I mean, I'm one of those people that can see in lots of different places around the country real value added by housing organisations that are linked into the community, working in partnership with the local authorities, thinking about why they're there to begin with, whatever profits going back in to do the job. I see the value, but I personally feel that the sort of debate was going in the wrong way. It was almost like we need to relabel who we are, or relabel what we do, rather than saying, wait a minute, what the contribution that the sector has to make is really, really important, and we need to do it better, and challenge ourselves. So when we took on the rethinking, I sort of talked to lots of people out in the sector, and a number of chief executives, and this maybe goes to Tony's point, and boards of housing organizations were beginning to ask themselves the same question. Have we moved too far? Have we away from our purpose? What are we really here to do? And I said, well, let's do a piece of work. Let's do a piece of work challenging that. And I mean, we were amazed by the response we got. We thought we had academics involved in all of this sort of stuff. And they said, well, if you can get 50 roundtables around the country, that'll give you enough to be sort of relevant. And we ended up having over 200. We had 2,000, 40% tenants. Everybody, all we did was produce a toolkit with some really basic questions. And the response was amazing. People said, we want this debate. So I think that the sector has sort of the debate in the sector is the right debate. We haven't come up with all the answers yet. And actually we were talking about this earlier, about 2 or 3 really key areas that we need to be taking forward, which are about how we do our job and are we doing it as well as we should. And one of the areas is around who's getting access to housing and allocations and whatever. And I think that is a really tricky issue. But we know that if housing organizations actually put up a barrier to homeless households and others getting access to begin with, there's a problem, because who's going to help those people? And then if they, down the line, have a very high level of evictions, well then that creates a problem as well. So there are some issues that we need still to address. And I think the third issue, sort of in the back of my mind as well, that we really need to think about is that stigma issue, which is a very big issue. And there's some good work going on, but we certainly haven't tackled it. And when talking to people that live in the sector, some of the filming we've done has been interesting in the ITN, where people make that comment about how they feel that others look at them because of where they live, and actually they just see it as their home. So I think the debate was the right debate. We haven't come up with the answers yet, but we certainly need to keep going, because I don't think we are where we need to be as a sector.
And actually, a lot of those issues are captured in some form in the Green Paper. and there's the big consultation. There is an evidence gathering process around allocations and lettings at the moment. Do you see the Green Paper as a bit of a sea change, or not only in how the government is viewing social housing, but as an opportunity for the sector actually to sort of reset itself and its relationship with its own tenants?
I mean, the Green Paper picks up a lot of the things that we did pick up in the rethinking. But we all know that there's some things in the Green Paper that aren't right, really, and don't go far enough. And I think we'll all respond to that consultation.
Yeah.
But the thing that has struck me is that the view, and this is where government does have a role to play, the view of social housing. I mean, there's actually a chapter heading that says springboard to home ownership. I think, well, wait a minute. It should be the springboard to a lot of things, but it isn't just a sort of you move through it so you finally get what you want out of life kind of thing with home ownership. So that kind of language creates the stigma. Whereas I think, yes, I mean, I have no problem if people want to buy their home and go, we should be doing whatever we can, but the reality is there are a lot of people that live in social housing, are receiving support or are part of the community. It is a tenure, should be a tenure of choice. So why aren't we really moving to that and making certain that that's the case?
Chief Executive views on the Green Paper?
Yeah, I think it's a sea change. I think the Green Paper combined with the Prime Minister coming along to the Housing Summit and talking about our tenants with a respect that I've not heard from a Conservative Prime Minister, I think is very different indeed. The fact that
stand in the broad, Tony?
do you know, I missed it because of course it wasn't on the programme. My chair, this is how equal opportunities we are, my chair had childcare responsibilities, so we arrived about 11 o'clock and we missed her. So I probably would have done though, because I thought that was quite something. I thought she spoke with humility. I thought she acknowledged some of the mistakes from the past. I read it, I did read it afterwards. I thought she did acknowledge the role which the government has played in stigmatising it. Unfortunately, as we know, no party leader can keep all the different MPs in check. And at the same time, Boris Johnson was going off at a fringe meeting describing social housing as diametrically opposed to the interests of the people who live in it. And for most...
which actually just brings me on to, is this a window of opportunity? Because we don't really know how long Theresa May is going to be Prime Minister. We don't know we're going to have a Conservative government. We don't know whether Boris Johnson could become leader. We just don't know what's around the corner.
That's
There's
right.
Brexit, there's everything.
Can I just comment as well? Maybe this is, I worked in government for many, many years, but I remember, and I still firmly believe this, that governments will come and go. You should seize the opportunity where there's an opportunity. So I do agree, there's a bit of let's push at that and get as much as we can through the door, because that's what we should be doing, and we should keep pushing on other changes that need to be made on welfare and whatever. But also, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that as a sector, we're here for the longer term.
Yes.
So we should be taking control of what we do. We don't need to wait for government. Government has a role in legislation, to a certain extent on funding, although there's huge resources in the sector that we could do an awful lot more with without waiting for the grant regime to change or whatever. And I just think that that's the thing that's also striking me about the sector. Quite a few people in the sector are sort of saying, we'll listen to government and we'll work with government, we'll do these various other things, but actually we need to get on with it. And I think, seize the opportunity, but let's not get kind of a captive of it and worry too much, because we should just be getting on and doing some things.
Yes, I think that's right, and that's a link to the Homes for Cathy. Really, you need a vision and values that will last beyond different governments, beyond different funding regimes. And although we've been criticised because of when the cuts came in, we started building commercial housing for sale, housing for market rent. It did mean that the sector kept going and was still trying to build homes one way or another, despite the difficulties that were put in place by the coalition government. And I think that's what boards and chief executives got to hold on to, really, that the association's got to have a wider purpose that builds communities, builds social value, looks after the vulnerable in our society, and keep doing that year after year after year, even if times are tough.
I think again there's a lot that we can do ourselves to tackle stigma. You know, it's just if we're not careful, it becomes our default position. Blame the government, and it's easy to see what the government does wrong. But equally, the preservation of boundaries between professional landlords and amateurish tenants. We can tackle that. We can help to break that down. We can do far more, I think, to co-create services together. Personally, this was one of the conversations we had in the British Library. I'm not happy with what the NatFed's done with regards to their offer for tenants. I think that's old-fashioned. I think it's what tenant consultation and transparency used to look like. But I think we can do far better than that if we get alongside our tenants and think about what services should be like in the future. And that really should mean whole services, I think. It should be about the whole person, the whole community. So when we've got for it, I'll just give you one very straightforward example from SMHA. We have a big group of volunteers now. We have people with mental health issues, say it's World Mental Health Day as well today. We have people with mental health issues working in our extra care housing schemes and vice versa. We have staff working as volunteers. We have volunteers working as staff, getting jobs with us. We will organise sessions, for example, around, again, just a very simple example, sleep. One of the things that helps us to have good mental health. We organised a session with somebody called the Sleep Geek, and that's open. It's open to volunteers, it's open to tenants, our customers, it's open to staff. When we came to think about tackling, for example, debt, Wonga, payday loans and what have you, the penny dropped. Actually, maybe some of our staff have got these problems. Maybe that's what they're spending their lunchtimes doing, juggling loans and what have you. And I think if we get away from thinking about us as the professionals, commissioned by those people over there and regulated by those people over there, providing these services out of the goodness of our hearts for those poor unfortunate people over there, we can break down all of that lot and just think about us as people, then we can do loads ourselves to
and
address the issue.
Do you accept, therefore, that has become the nature of the relationship over a period of time?
I think it has. I mean, it kind of started off like that as well, didn't it? It was a kind of Victorian philanthropy. That's the roots of housing management. So I think rethinking housing management and our relationship with each other is definitely is overdue.
Yeah, and that is one of the other strands. I was saying there were 3 strands that we were thinking about as the next stage. One of them is around rethinking housing management. So lots of questions have been raised about that, not just around tenant-customer engagement, but just more generally speaking. So we're quite keen on trying to take that piece of work forward. And I think, Tony, you're right. It's very, I do like history, and I think we shouldn't forget that we can learn from what we've tried before. So I don't want to sort of completely, not everything we've done before is out of fashion.
Octavia Hill.
Yeah, exactly. I have to say, she still said a lot of good stuff. But also, you are right. We need to be looking at other sectors. We need to be thinking about doing things differently. We shouldn't just fall back into what's just comfortable because it's not enough. I think that's the answer, really. What we've heard is some good stuff, but not enough, really. And I think we need to challenge ourselves on that.
So, final thoughts on Housing Day. I'll just go around you in terms of. Let me ask you your priorities, perhaps, for 2019 from an organisational point of view. Go first?
Sure.
Okay.
So I had a long train journey to get down here today. So I read, I won't say every single tweet, every single Housing Day tweet, but for 2 hours I read the stuff that was under the Housing Day line. And it worked on all kinds of different levels, didn't it? There was loads of corporate stuff there. I'm sure various organisations had set them up in advance to go out at different times. And that's interesting and good that everybody's involved like that. And then there was a real debate going on. There was a real debate going on this year, which I don't remember from previous years, about exactly the kinds of things that we're talking about, with some real challenges in there. People like Paul Singh, the director of dispossession, coming in, tenants groups coming in and saying, no, you've not got it right. You're just all sitting up there in your ivory towers, congratulating yourselves, patting yourselves on the back. I think those kinds of challenges are real, and that's what we should be engaging with.
Tony?
I mean, we've been pretty successful at building new homes. We want to keep doing that. There is a desperate need out there in the areas we operate in Herts, Bucks and Beds. When you talk to directors of housing and you ask them what could housing associations do to help homelessness, they say build more homes. So that's a priority, to keep trying to stretch the resources of the association to build more homes, which will inevitably house homeless people. We have a big care and supported housing side. Times are tough with social care cuts and budgets. You know, if that can survive, we're doing some great stuff in our care and supported housing with homeless people, with young people, with people with mental health problems, people with learning disabilities. If we can keep that part of our business going, make those contracts viable, that would be fantastic, I think. And I think we've got to engage. We want to, the third part of our business is being an excellent social landlord, and we've got to engage with our customers and see what that looks like in the 21st century. Because as both the other speakers have said, times have moved on. The nature of our offer has got to adapt and change.
So I guess what makes the Chartered Institute of Housing unique? And I think there are a couple of things about us. One is that we are an educational charity. You know, we are about investing in the people that work in housing and making certain they are equipped to do their jobs and to be proud to be a professional, not because there's a gap, but to be proud to be professional. And not to be afraid to say, I need to know more, I need to develop more. So inevitably, we've got to just keep working on that. And I think as part of that, I mean, obviously we look at our membership as well, and we want to expand our membership because we want there to be really effective networks of people, not just people working in housing. I was mentioning to Terrie and the others earlier that we actually have tenant members as well. So there is something about, do we have a role? Can we do more around equipping and informing and providing information, whatever. So there is something around that. And I think many people talk about the aging profession, including myself. We've had some really lively young people and young members and futures, and that's what I want to do. It's a great, housing is just a wonderful profession. It's a wonderful thing. And we need to make certain that we're creating an environment where people can do the best that they can do. And it does link to our policy work. So our priorities will obviously be the next phase on rethinking, keeping it on the agenda, responding to the green paper, pushing for improvements. And the other area there's lots of policy work we'll do on homelessness and other areas, but welfare is the one. We're just not yet winning the arguments on welfare policy, so we'll just keep producing all that Anaraki evidence that we always do. So that kind of evidence-based balance and across the sector, because we work across the sector, not for any particular housing provider. So we need to keep making those points.
Fantastic. And on that note, I think we'll wrap that up. Thank you so much for
Okay.
coming along.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.